Coming up on District Wire News, will the U.S. government shut down? If the President and Congress don't reach a decision about the 2011 federal budget by Friday, the government may close. We'll explain how this all affects you straight ahead. We've got a live report and an in-depth interview with an expert.
Then, a measles outbreak in D.C. People riding the Metrobus may be the first to have been exposed to the disease after an infected woman used public transportation. District Wire News starts now. Good evening, I'm Heather Fung.
And I'm Danny Rizzo. As we speak, Congress is debating what to cut and what to keep in the 2011 budget. With the threat of a government shutdown looming, Dan Merica joins us live in the studio with the latest on the budget standoff. Dan?
Thanks, Danny. In the last year, Congress has not passed one federal agency budget. The stalemate is leading to a possible government shutdown as soon as the end of this week. While Republicans and Democrats try to reach an agreement, the country waits to see if Congress can keep the government open for business. Politicians in Washington have their eye on Friday, the date Democrats and Republicans must reach an agreement on the 2011 budget. But if they can't agree, funding will dry up and the federal government could shut down. House Republicans, led by Speaker John Boehner of Ohio, have proposed a 2-week budget continuation that would cut $4 billion from the current spending levels.
We have a moral responsibility to address the problems that we face. And that means working together to cut spending and to rein in government.
Congress disagrees on whether it should continue to pass short-term budgets, instead of debating the entire budget as a whole. If Congress passes another continuing resolution, it will be the 5th in this fiscal year. But most Democrats say Congress isn't looking at the entire budget.
Focusing on just a small part of the budget. Only 12% of the budget is being considered for reduction. And if we're going to ultimately solve this problem, we're going to have to do much more than consider only 12% of the budget.
This would not be the first time the government is shut down. In 1995, then President Bill Clinton and Speaker Newt Gingrich couldn't agree on cuts to Medicaid, and the government shut down twice, in 1995 and in 1996. The GOP got most of the blame for the 95 shutdown, and James Thurber, professor at American University, believes the current House GOP has learned from their mistakes.
Republicans really have a clear strategy, theme, and message. They are all teed up to blame the president for this. That was not the case in 95 and 96.
Each government agency has their own guidelines for shutdown. So a shutdown this week would be different than one 16 years ago. What is expected to shut down? 368 national parks and museums, passport offices, bankruptcy filings, and all non-essential government employees would be asked to go home. No matter what closes, experts say the political stakes are high for both parties. For District Wire News, I'm Dan Merica. I'm here with Mr. Curtis Gans. Mr. Gans, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure. So I'm going to ask you the question that's on everybody's mind. What are the chances we have a government shutdown after Friday?
It is unlikely that we'll have a government shutdown on Friday. It is probably unlikely that we'll have a government shutdown anytime in the next year and a half. On the other hand, we may be having a series of continuing resolutions all the way up to the 2012 election.
That's, the interesting thing is how this plays with the American public. And that's what so much depends on the election. Washington Post poll came out and 36% of people polled blame Republicans, while 35% blame President Obama and the Democrats. Basically a wash. Your expertise is in polling. What did you think of the poll? And let me know, what do you think of how this plays with the American population?
I think the poll is too early because the issues have not been highlighted. There's a basic issue underlying, which is to say, is unemployment more important or deficit reduction more important in the immediate? The Republicans are essentially arguing for deficit reduction and an ideological agenda of how you achieve that reduction. The Democrats are going to hold the line against the ideological agenda and excessive present deficit reduction that might hurt the jobs issue.
So this is not the first time our government has been on the brink of shutdown. In 1995, as was said in the package, President Clinton and Newt Gingrich stared down and could not agree on cuts to Medicaid and Medicare. A poll back then said that 46% of Americans after the shutdown blamed Newt Gingrich and the Republicans for that shutdown. What do you see are similarities between now and 1995?
I think the similarities are very strong, because it wasn't only, by the way, Medicare and Medicaid, it was also environmental policy and a whole series of other things that, that the Gingrich Congress was pursuing. And I think that's happening now. There is a desire, at least on the part of Speaker Boehner, not to have a shutdown. So that it is likely that we probably will have continuing resolutions of some duration with small things being done. For instance, today there was a GAO report that showed massive duplication of programs within the federal government. I think you're going to get agreement between the Democrats and Republicans to consolidate those programs and by virtue of that reduce spending. I think that one will pass it to be the next continuing resolution. But I don't think you're going to have any agreement on $61 billion worth of reduction and getting rid of Head Start.
So $61 billion, you're referencing Eric Cantor proposed cutting $61 billion from the 2011 federal budget, something the Democrats won't agree to. Let's go back to John Boehner, though. John Boehner was there when Newt Gingrich stared down President Clinton and saw the repercussions of that. He has 87 new House members, many of which made promises to their constituents to make some cuts to the federal government. How does John Boehner rein in those 87 new members while also realizing the history of this issue?
I don't envy John Boehner's herding of the cats, which is what essentially he has. John Boehner, I think, at least realizes that there was not a mandate for $61 billion worth of cuts and cuts on major programs that the majority of Americans support. Whether he can persuade his group in the House that they have to moderate what they're proposing will be one of the adventures we'll have for the next year.
Well, we will all certainly be watching. Mr. Gantz, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Heather, back to you.
Thanks, Dan. In Libya, protests and the government's violent crackdown continues, and Western governments are responding. The U.S. has frozen $30 billion in Libyan assets, and European governments are making similar moves. The U.S. and NATO are also moving military forces into the region. Meanwhile, leaders are calling on Libya's Muammar Gaddafi to step down. He is denying there are protests in Tripoli, Libya's capital, where pro-democracy protesters have gathered and clashed with government forces for days as the death toll continues to rise. CNN's Relitza Vasilva has more.
Protesters in the town of Zawiya chant for the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi. 14 days into the uprising, anti-government forces edge closer to Gaddafi's stronghold of Tripoli. But here, just an hour west of the capital, government forces have defected to the opposition. South of Benghazi in eastern Libya, a Libyan Air Force jet bombed a military base believed to be under the control of anti-Gaddafi forces. And in Geneva, diplomats are trying to figure out how to help remove Gaddafi from power. The U.S. Secretary of State says the international community needs to put more pressure on the regime.
Through their actions, they have lost the legitimacy to govern. And the people of Libya have made themselves clear. It is time for Gaddafi to go.
Over the weekend, the UN Security Council voted for tough restrictions and an investigation that could lead to war crimes charges. But with thousands fleeing into neighboring Tunisia, leaders say it will take more than diplomacy to solve the crisis.
It's not just about these sanctions, it's about getting support into the country, it's about being ready to deal with the problems that are being created by people leaving the country and, of course, making sure our citizens are safe.
Relitza Vasilva reporting.